Human, if I turn my back now, do not mistake it for carelessness. The alien woman's voice carried a quiet pride that didn't match the tension in the corridor. Ethan Ward blinked behind the transparent visor of his helmet. That sentence, he said carefully, is not nearly as reassuring as you think it is. Saraline of the Luriath Dominion did not respond immediately. The corridor lights flickered faintly along the curved metallic walls of the abandoned station. Dust floated in slow spirals in the thin artificial gravity, illuminated by the soft glow of scanning drones drifting ahead of them. Saraline stood tall and perfectly still, her silver armor reflecting the pale blue emergency lighting. Like most Luriath, she looked almost human at first glance, 2 arms, 2 legs, elegant posture, but the similarities stopped there. Her skin carried a faint luminous sheen like moonlight on glass. Her ears swept back in long, graceful arcs, and her eyes glowed softly like distant stars. At the moment, those glowing eyes were studying Ethan with unsettling intensity. "You appear uncertain," she observed. "That's because you just announced you're about to expose your back in a potentially hostile corridor," Ethan replied. "That is correct." "Right." He looked down the hallway. Broken panels hung from the ceiling. A security door at the far end had been ripped open by what looked like heavy plasma fire. The abandoned mining station had been silent since their team arrived 20 minutes earlier, but silence in deep space was rarely comforting, especially in a system where 3 trade ships had disappeared in the last month. Ethan tapped the side of his helmet. "Control, this is Ward. You guys hearing this conversation?" A calm voice answered through the comm. "Loud and clear," said Lieutenant Park from the reconnaissance shuttle orbiting above. "And for the record, I agree with you. Letting the alien officer turn her back during a sweep seems strategically questionable." Saraline's long ears twitched slightly. "I can hear your transmission, Lieutenant Park," she said without raising her voice. There was a pause. "Right," Park said. "Forgot about that." Ethan suppressed a smile. Working with the Luriath delegation had been strange from the beginning. They were one of the oldest civilizations in this quadrant of the galaxy, an empire older than humanity's first orbital station. Their starships were elegant, their diplomacy precise, and their warriors were famous across dozens of systems. They were also incredibly formal. Everything had meaning, every gesture, every posture, every word. Which made situations like this deeply uncomfortable. Saraline tilted her head slightly. "You are thinking many things," she said. "That obvious. You frown when you analyze a problem." Ethan exhaled. "Okay, yes. I'm analyzing the problem where my partner is about to dramatically turn around in the middle of a possible ambush." Saraline stepped forward into the corridor. Then, without hesitation, she turned her back to him, completely. Her gaze shifted forward, scanning the darkened hallway. Ethan froze. "You actually did it." "Correct. You didn't even hesitate. That would defeat the purpose." Ethan stared at the back of her silver armor. "Well," he muttered, "this is either an alien cultural thing or the worst tactical decision I've seen all week." Behind him, 2 other members of the joint mission team stepped into the corridor. Both Luriath soldiers. Both of them immediately stopped moving. Their glowing eyes widened slightly as they saw Saraline standing with her back fully exposed toward the human. One of them whispered something quietly in their language. The other responded with what sounded like disbelief. Ethan glanced over his shoulder. "You guys okay?" Neither of them answered. They were staring at him now, not with hostility, not even with suspicion, something else, something closer to shock. "Did I miss something?" Ethan asked. Saraline continued scanning the corridor ahead. "There is movement ahead," she said calmly. That ended the conversation instantly. Ethan raised his pulse rifle and stepped closer to her. "If something jumps out," he said quietly, "I'm blaming you. I accept this responsibility." The corridor stretched ahead into darkness. Their boots echoed softly against the metal floor. Scanning drones drifted forward, projecting faint blue mapping grids across the walls. Ethan couldn't stop thinking about the reaction from the other Luriath soldiers. They had looked stunned, and not because of the abandoned station, because of him. "Okay," Ethan said after a moment, lowering his voice slightly. "I need to ask something." Saraline did not turn around. "Ask. Why exactly did those 2 look like they just watched you jump out an airlock?" She was quiet for a few seconds. "Because they understood the meaning of what I did." "And I didn't." "That is correct." Ethan rubbed his forehead through the helmet. "Fantastic." They reached an intersection in the corridor. Saraline paused. Her glowing eyes studied the darkness ahead. Ethan realized something strange. She still hadn't turned around, not once. "You know," he said slowly, "most soldiers occasionally check behind themselves. My sensors track your movement. That's not the same as visually confirming I'm not secretly a space pirate." Caroline was silent for a moment, then unexpectedly she said something softer. "You are not." Ethan blinked. That was confident. "Yes." Another pause stretched between them. Ethan's curiosity was starting to overpower his caution. "All right," he said finally. "I give up." "On what?" "On pretending this isn't weird." Caroline's ears shifted slightly, a motion he was beginning to recognize as mild amusement. "Explain," she said. "You turned your back to me in a hostile environment," Ethan replied. "Your soldiers reacted like they just witnessed something illegal, and you still haven't told me why." The corridor was silent except for the faint hum of station power. Caroline finally turned her head slightly, not enough to face him. Just enough that one glowing silver eye became visible over her shoulder. "In my culture," she said quietly, "the back is the most vulnerable place on the body." Ethan nodded. "Yeah, that's true for humans too." She looked forward again. "To expose it intentionally," she continued, "is not carelessness." Ethan waited. The station lights flickered again, dust drifted slowly through the air. Finally, she finished the sentence. "It is trust." Ethan stared at her back again. "You're serious?" "Yes." He considered that for a moment, then he sighed. "Okay," he said, "that raises several new questions." Caroline's voice carried that same quiet pride as before. "You may ask them." Ethan adjusted his rifle and looked down the dark corridor ahead. "Great," he said, "because right now I'm pretty sure the entire alien half of this mission thinks something extremely important just happened." Caroline did not deny it. And somewhere behind them, the two Lyraeth soldiers were still watching the human with expressions that were no longer merely surprised. They were studying him, as if trying to understand why one of their own had just given a human something that, among their people, was almost never given at all. The first sign that something was wrong came from the silence. Mining stations were never this quiet. Even abandoned ones usually carried echoes. Loose panels clanging somewhere deep inside the structure, distant ventilation systems, struggling to breathe, automated systems running forgotten routines. But here, inside the drifting metal carcass of station KX-441, there was nothing. Just the slow hum of failing power and the soft echo of boots on metal. Ethan kept his rifle raised as they moved deeper through the corridor, the beam of his helmet light sliding across the walls. Caroline still walked ahead of him, and she still had not turned around. "You know," Ethan muttered, "this is starting to feel like a trust exercise that HR would definitely not approve of." Caroline did not slow down. "Your concern has been noted. That sounded suspiciously like you ignoring me." "Yes." Behind them, the two Lyraeth soldiers followed at a careful distance. Ethan glanced back again. They were still watching him, not the corridor, not the mission, him. He lowered his voice. "Okay, I'm going to say this quietly so the alien honor guard doesn't hear it." "They can hear you," Caroline replied calmly. Ethan sighed. "Right, super hearing, forgot." He tried again anyway. "Why are they staring at me like I accidentally married into your royal family?" Caroline was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "Because they are attempting to understand you." "That's worrying." "It should not be." "That's also worrying." They reached the central junction of the station. 4 corridors spread outward like spokes of a wheel. At the center stood a massive circular chamber that had once housed the mining station's cargo elevators. Now the elevator shafts were dark, and the chamber was empty, almost. Ethan noticed it first. "Caroline." "I see it." At the far end of the chamber, one of the cargo doors had been forced open. Not with plasma, not with explosives. The metal had been peeled back, like something extremely strong had pulled it apart. Ethan felt a chill crawl down his spine. "That's not standard pirate equipment." Caroline stepped forward slowly. Her glowing eyes scanned the chamber. Behind them, the two Lyraeth soldiers moved into defensive positions. One of them spoke quietly through the team comm. "Commander Caroline, this station was reported empty." "Yes," she replied. "It appears the report was incorrect." Ethan pointed toward the torn doorway. "Should we maybe call the shuttle and tell them this place is definitely not empty?" A new voice came through the comm channel. "Captain Alvarez." "We're already detecting unusual energy signatures down there," the captain said. "Be advised, your life signs are being tracked by something inside the station." Ethan froze. Define something. Working on that. Saraline stepped closer to the broken doorway. Ethan noticed something strange again. Her posture had changed, not defensive, focused, almost protective. Of him, he leaned slightly toward her. You're doing the back trust thing again. Yes. You realize that's starting to feel like a lot of responsibility. That is correct. Before Ethan could respond, one of the Lariath soldiers behind them spoke again. His voice carried clear tension. Commander, permission to speak openly. Saraline didn't turn. Granted. The soldier hesitated, then said something in the Lariath language. Ethan didn't understand the words, but he understood the tone. Concern. Saraline answered in the same language, short, firm. The soldier fell silent. Ethan raised an eyebrow. Should I be worried about that conversation? Saraline replied calmly. He believes I have extended too much trust to you. Ethan pointed at himself. That seems fair. He also believes humans are unpredictable. That is extremely fair. Saraline stepped through the torn doorway. The chamber beyond was darker. Huge mining machinery loomed like silent giants around them. Conveyor tracks hung suspended above the floor. The air smelled faintly of burned circuits. Ethan's helmet scanner flickered. Okay, he said quietly. My motion sensors are lighting up. How many? Saraline asked. More than I'd like. The captain's voice came through again. Multiple signatures detected. Non-human, non-Lariath, unknown classification. Fantastic, Ethan muttered. Then something moved, fast. A shadow darted between two towering machines. One of the Lariath soldiers spun, raising his weapon. Contact. A metallic shape lunged from the darkness. Ethan fired instinctively. The pulse blast slammed into the creature and sent it crashing against a mining rig. It was a machine. But not one built for mining. 4 legs, armored plating, glowing red optics. A combat drone. Ethan stared at it. That's definitely not part of the mining equipment. Saraline's voice was calm but colder now. This station was taken. By who? Before she could answer, more red lights flickered on in the darkness. Dozens of them. Ethan slowly turned his head. Oh. The drones stepped out of the shadows. A full swarm, weapons charging. The Lariath soldiers raised their rifles instantly. One of them whispered something again in their language. This time Ethan recognized the tone. Fear. Saraline didn't move. She still stood with her back toward him. Human, she said quietly. Yeah, do not move. Ethan stared at the advancing machines. That was already the plan. The drones paused, scanning. Their red optics swept across the group. Then one of them spoke in a mechanical voice. Lariath military presence confirmed. A second drone rotated toward Ethan. Human presence confirmed. The machines seemed to hesitate. Their sensors flickered, as if processing something unexpected. Then the lead drone spoke again. Priority update. Ethan swallowed. Please don't say something dramatic. The machine's voice echoed through the chamber. Human subject classified as strategic variable. The Lariath soldiers exchanged stunned looks. Ethan blinked. What? Saraline finally spoke again. Her voice was very quiet now. Interesting. Ethan slowly turned his head toward the glowing silver eye visible over her shoulder. Okay, he said carefully. I feel like everyone knows something important about me that I definitely do not know. The drone's weapons powered up. The chamber filled with a rising mechanical whine. And somewhere deep inside the station, a signal began transmitting across the stars, reporting one simple, alarming message. The human had been found. The drones fired first. Blue pulses of energy ripped through the darkness of the mining chamber, scorching the metal floor as the Lariath soldiers scattered behind the towering machinery. Ethan dove sideways behind a conveyor pillar, the blast of heat from a near miss flashing across his visor. Okay, he shouted into the comm. Those things are definitely not friendly. Saraline moved with frightening precision. Her silver armor flashed through the dim chamber as she slid across the floor and took position beside him, her weapon already firing in controlled bursts that shattered 2 advancing drones. The machines adapted instantly. Their formation spread wider, calculating, learning. One of the Lariath soldiers shouted from behind a mining rig, Commander, their targeting priority is shifting. Another burst of fire slammed into the pillar above Ethan's head, sending molten metal dripping down beside him. Shifting toward what? Ethan asked. The soldier answered grimly, You. Ethan peeked around the pillar just long enough to see several drones adjusting their weapons directly toward him. Oh, come on, he muttered. What did I do? Saraline didn't answer immediately. She was watching the machines, watching the way they moved, watching the way their sensors kept returning to the humans standing behind her. Then she spoke quietly. They are not attacking randomly. Ethan fired at a drone that leapt over a conveyor belt. Yeah, that much is obvious. They are trying to capture you. That made him pause. Capture me. Another drone lunged forward. Saraline cut it down with a precise shot before it reached him. Yes. Why would anyone want me? Her glowing eyes flicked briefly toward him. You are human. That's not usually a high-value trait. Behind them, one of the Lariath soldiers stepped closer, his expression tight with tension. Commander, the signal we detected earlier is still transmitting. Zorth, the drones. Ethan frowned. They're calling someone. The soldier nodded. Someone who already knew you were here. That sentence settled heavily in the chamber. The swarm advanced again, this time faster. Ethan ducked another blast. Okay, he shouted. I feel like there's a very important piece of information missing from this conversation. Saraline finally turned. For the first time since entering the station, she fully faced him. Her silver eyes were steady. Humans entered interstellar space only 37 years ago, she said. Yeah, we're new, Ethan replied. The Lariath Empire has monitored developing civilizations for thousands of years. That sounds slightly creepy, but go on. You are not the first species to be observed. Another drone rushed them. Saraline shot it without looking away from Ethan. But humans are unusual. Ethan blinked. That sounds ominous. She continued calmly. Your species demonstrates a rare neurological trait. What trait? Adaptive trust. Ethan stared. I'm sorry, what? Most civilizations build alliances slowly, she said. Cautiously, carefully. That seems smart. Humans do not. Ethan opened his mouth, closed it again. Okay, that's fair. She continued. You form bonds rapidly, across species, across cultures, even across enemies. Another drone fired. Ethan rolled aside and returned fire. Yeah, but how does that make me a target for robot kidnapping? One of the Lariath soldiers answered this time. Because there are factions in the galaxy who fear it. Ethan blinked. Fear friendship. The soldier looked almost embarrassed. In simple terms, yes. Saraline nodded. Several rival powers believe humanity's ability to build trust could destabilize existing empires. Ethan stared at her. So, someone sent murder robots because I'm too friendly. In essence, another wave of drones surged forward. Saraline stepped between them and Ethan again, completely, her back to him. The Lariath soldiers noticed immediately. One of them inhaled sharply, even in the middle of combat. Ethan saw it too. You're doing it again. Yes, you know the robots are literally trying to capture me. Yes, and you're still standing in front of me. Yes, he stared at her back. The silver armor reflected the flickering emergency lights like liquid starlight. You really trust me that much? Her answer came without hesitation. Yes. Something in Ethan shifted at that moment. The fear was still there, the chaos, the danger, but something else rose beside it. Responsibility. These aliens, this ancient empire, had placed something rare in his hands, trust. And apparently half the galaxy hated that idea. Ethan slowly stood. Saraline noticed immediately. You were told not to move. I changed my mind. The drones surged closer, weapons charging. Ethan stepped beside her instead of behind her. The Lariath soldiers looked shocked. You are exposing yourself, one of them warned. Ethan shrugged. Apparently that's how trust works around here. He raised his rifle. Let's prove them wrong. The next few minutes were chaos. Blaster fire filled the chamber. Drones shattered against the machinery. Lariath precision combined with human improvisation in a way none of the observing factions in the galaxy had predicted. By the time the last drone collapsed in a smoking heap, the chamber fell silent again. Only the faint hum of damaged equipment remained. Ethan lowered his rifle slowly. Please tell me that was the last one. The captain's voice came through the comm. Our sensors confirm the signal has stopped. Whatever network they were using just lost contact. One of the Lariath soldiers stepped closer to Ethan. His expression had changed. No longer suspicion, respect. You stood beside the commander, he said quietly. Ethan shrugged. Seemed rude not to. The soldier glanced at Saraline, then bowed his head slightly toward the human, a gesture Ethan hadn't seen before. Saraline watched him for a long moment. Then slowly she turned around again. This time not because of danger, Not because of combat, she simply faced away from him. Standing calmly in the quiet chamber, her back exposed, Ethan understood immediately. He didn't speak, didn't joke, didn't question it. He simply stood there, watching the corridor behind her, guarding it. The two Lyraeth soldiers exchanged a look. One of them whispered softly in their language. The words carried quiet awe. "Now I understand." The other nodded, yes. Across the silent mining chamber, human and alien stood back to back. And for the first time since the Alliance mission began, the bond between them was no longer a diplomatic experiment. It was real.